Today, Nikon has announced the Z5 II, which marks its brand new full-frame FX entry model. So the body design on the Z5 II is a lot like the original Z5 with some elements of the Z6 III without the top-level display. Several noticeable differences on here. First of all, we have a fully articulating screen, which is going to be great for people who shoot video. The other noticeable difference is we've got a picture control button on the top of the camera. Now this allows you to directly access various color looks that you can create in Nikon's free NX Studio. You can also download pre-made looks using Nikon Image Cloud. And the camera features dual SD card slots. So with the Z5 II, we have a major upgrade from the original Z5, and then now we have a 24 megapixel backside illuminated CMOS sensor. One of my favorite upgrades on here now is this actually is brought up to date using the EXPEED 7 processor. This is the same processor that we have in now 5 full-frame models from Nikon. It's fast, it means you're going to get incredible autofocus, and it is excellent. So the autofocus is extremely impressive on this camera. One thing I did not like about the original Z5 is that the autofocus really was a weak point. You do have to consider, though, that Nikon in general with their entire product line were in a very different position back in 2020 than they are today. We now have the EXPEED 7 processor, and I think also the design philosophy with Nikon has changed as well. We have that same processor across the entire camera line, so we can expect the same types of performance across all camera bodies, including the entry level, if you will, Z5 II. The autofocus is extremely responsive. It's very fast. It's the kind of performance that you would expect out of any Nikon camera, and I really like this about it. The other thing that I love about the autofocus performance is the subject detection mode. So pretty much when you set this up, we've got 9 different subjects that we can choose from, including now bird mode. And so this is a very powerful camera for a very reasonable price. This is also one of the first Nikon cameras to feature the AFA mode. So we have AFS, if you're just going to do single focus. We have AFC, which is continuous autofocus. AFA allows people who are not sure which one they want to use. It will detect the mode that it needs to be in. So if you're shooting a portrait or a stagnant subject, it will be in AFS. If the subject begins to move or become erratic, you're shooting sports, it will automatically go into AFC. This is the first Nikon to have that. For those who want to use this camera for burst speed shooting, it does do up to 11 frames per second with the mechanical shutter in RAW, up to 14 frames per second in JPEG. If you're using the electronic shutter, you can get up to 15 frames per second in RAW and 30 frames per second in JPEG. Another thing that's very significant about this camera is you do have an optional 1 second of pre-burst shooting. So if you're the type of person who tends to come in there a little late and miss the shot, we got you covered. The Z5 features 5-axis in-camera vibration reduction, which also allows for pixel shift shooting for 96 megapixel images that can be stitched together using Nikon's free Studio NX software. Now, the vibration reduction also gives you focus point VR, which means the camera tailors to the area covered by the selected autofocus point. What this does is it gives you very accurate vibration reduction, especially when shooting stills where you need a point in the image to be perfectly sharp. Another big upgrade on this camera is the viewfinder, and the viewfinder is a new viewfinder. It is extremely bright. You get up to 3,000 nits of brightness should you need it. One of the things that I like about this is we're outside in New York City right now shooting in very high contrast lighting. The sun's out, we've got dark shadows, and sometimes when you have high contrast, it's hard to see what you're doing in the viewfinder. I have had no problems with this at all. In fact, the viewfinder experience on this is really pretty good. I've been shooting with the 50mm f1.4. You can actually really see the detail that you're getting into. I can see when I'm knocking the background away from the subject. This is a really good viewfinder. So being in New York City, we had to, of course, hit one of my favorite places, which is Cafe Reggio. Cafe Reggio is extremely eclectic inside, and it's also low light. This is a really cool place to test the low light performance on this camera. It's actually really good. It's a major improvement over the previous Z5, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that we have a new backside illuminated sensor in this model. Performance is a lot like what you're going to see in models like the ZF, which I really like, and it makes it very versatile when you're shooting in, let's just say, alternative lighting situations where you have very little of it. And of course, one of the big new features on the Z5 II is the dedicated picture control button. I actually like using this quite a bit. This is great for content creators who typically work in a JPEG type workflow, and they want to be able to get looks applied to their images in camera so they can immediately go online with them. This is a huge help, just having a dedicated button that you can just switch between these on the fly when you're shooting. One of my favorite in here is the deep tone monochrome. You get really cool, moody black and white look with these. Of course, for photographers who are a lot less dependent on picture styles, this button is remappable. So if you're going to do all your editing in RAW, you can remap this button to something else, set your own custom function. So let's talk about video specs. Now, while I would not say this is Nikon's most featured video camera, it does give you what you need for most utility 4K workflows, and for what it is, it's quite capable. So this is the familiar 24 megapixel sensor configuration, so we get up to 4K 30p with no cropping. You can shoot 60p in 4K, but it does have the familiar 1.5x crop, so it becomes a DX camera for high frame rates. Now, two things that I really do like about this camera. First is the ability to shoot 12-bit NRAW footage to the SD cards. In fact, this is the first camera that will allow you to record NRAW to SD media. Secondly, you can record N-Log with this camera, and you have access to all the free red LUTs. You know, one of the interesting things about mirrorless cameras, and what we've seen happen really in the last 10 years with any camera brand, is a lot of advanced functionality in these things. And it ends up with a lot of features that are very specific to specific needs. And so let's say a high-performance sports car. If you want to shoot video overcranked at 60 frames per second, you don't want any crop, there are sensors now that are stacked that'll allow you to do things like that. So while, yes, a camera at this price point is not going to be as full-featured as something like the top-of-the-line Z8 or Z9, for what this camera does, it does it very well. You get a lot of camera for your money on this, and while it doesn't do everything, and it's not the fastest camera you could possibly buy, video is very solid for what it does. You're not going to get high frame rates, but I think for what this camera does, it does it really well. I've actually really enjoyed shooting on this today. There's no reason why you can't get incredible shots with this camera, and it comes in at around $1,600 US, so I would love to know what you guys think. I will talk about this more when I have more time on it in the future. Catch you guys in the next video. Until then, later.